And I also don't do introductions. I should have said that first. So,
Yeah, I've listened.
Okay,
So
okay, good. So
I was like, I don't know who these people are, but
right.
they figure it out as it goes.
That's what I kind of feel like. If we just start having a conversation, and that's how you get to know somebody. Is that my glasses are got to glare? Is that you just start talking, and people finally figure it out. But we'll start first by getting into your background. You know, I know you've done a bodybuilding thing. You've ran a marathon. You're a hiker. You've got a book. So yeah, let's just put the ball in your court, and we'll see where we go from there.
Okay.
So you have what motivated you to get this book going, or writing this book, I guess?
Yeah. So my book is called Strong Like Her, a celebration of rule breakers, history makers, and unstoppable athletes. It came out last year from Simon & Schuster, and it is a cultural history about women and physical strength. And there were a lot of factors that went into me wanting to do this book project. I think the first is that I started strength training probably in 2014, 2015. And I had always been athletic and played a lot of sports, but I had never really wanted to be stronger when I was growing up. It just wasn't something that I saw a lot of girls or women doing, and it wasn't something I ever really thought about too much. So when I started to strength train, it really kind of changed my ideas about what I was capable of and what I felt like as I was getting stronger. And I was seeing so many other strong women in the public eye. American Ninja Warrior was becoming really popular. CrossFit was blowing up. A lot of people were participating in obstacle course races. And it just felt like on Instagram and in other places I was looking, I was seeing a lot more muscularity on women than I ever had before. And that got me thinking about where, how that had evolved, whether maybe it had been cool for women to be strong in previous eras and it was something that kind of ebbed and flowed, or maybe it was something that had been progressing in a linear fashion and we were at the peak of it, but I really didn't know. And it was when I signed up for a bodybuilding show that all of this kind of coalesced and came together, because I started to get a lot of different reactions. On one hand, people were like, this is really cool. What does your training plan look like? What does it mean to be in a competition? Why are you turning orange? And, they were very interested in those aspects of it. And then on the other hand, I got a lot of comments like, don't get too big because men don't like that, or don't change your body in a way that's not pleasing to the eye, or don't get hurt. So it felt like, on one hand, people thought that developing visible muscularity was a cool thing to do, but we still had these ideas about what women should look like, what activities they should pursue. And so I started to do some research, and I went to the library and I checked out a lot of books on the history of fitness. And I found that there wasn't much about women. I just wasn't reading much about the progression of women, particularly in strength sports. And so that is where I saw this opportunity to really do this book.
So you said you were athletic all your life, or growing up, right?
Right.
And you played sports. Did they not, when I say they, I guess your educators or in high school or whatever have you, they didn't provide strength training for you at that time, or?
Not really. So my main sports in high school, my main sport was basketball. We never strength trained. And then swimming and tennis. We did not strength train for tennis. We did go into the weight room for swimming for what's called dry land training, but we never picked up a barbell. We didn't use weights. We were mostly in there doing body weight movements, which is totally fine. Nothing wrong with that. But there was not an emphasis on lifting. I did a little bit of it. I did take a weightlifting class in 9th grade, and I took one on my own over the summer, my junior year or something like that. But it just, I don't know. When I remember I first started deadlifting after I graduated from college, and a trainer set me up with a deadlift. And I think I was deadlifting something like 40 pounds, which no shade to that, but wasn't anywhere near my capability of what I could deadlift. And then once I actually started getting into strength training, I realized I was easily capable of deadlifting over 200 pounds, but I didn't know that back then. And I didn't see women deadlifting in the gym, so there just wasn't, there weren't those examples that I was seeing in my daily life.
So were you seeing this or doing this at a gym or like a Planet Fitness or I don't know, any type of regular gym, but not at like a high school gym where you saw you're a trainer trying to hook you up with this? Is this where you started?
That was post college. So
okay.
Back in high school, I did go to like a local YMCA and got an orientation to the weight room.
Yeah.
But that, it was very much focused on the machines, and I don't know that we did that much free weight training. I don't think we were back squatting or deadlifting or anything. So it was really like not what it could have been.
So in my experience, I started in 9th grade, and in high school, I don't know how it is out there on the West Coast. I've never been out there, but we did block scheduling where we did an hour and a half per class, and you had 4 classes throughout the day. And once you got to 9th grade, you could take a weightlifting class. And, that's where I started. And I was just going based off what our teacher there at the time just wanted to teach us. And now some of his stuff was good. Some of it was not great. But that's where, like you said, I started seeing myself progress. And that's when I started like drinking the Kool-Aid and getting more and more into strength training and seeing what I could do. But it was predominantly guys that took that class rather than, like a 50-50 or 60-40 or what have you. But I remember there was like the handful, and they either played a sport in high school, but no other females took that class.
Yeah, we had something similar where in 9th grade we could take weightlifting. It was considered like an advanced class and you had to test into it. And I took it, and there were only a handful of other girls who took it. But again, it was, we were in the weight room a bit, but it was no free weights. It was all on the machines. So, and it was good. It was fine. But it wasn't something that was super popular. And then I didn't take PE really the rest of my high school career because, I was busy taking academic classes, and because I played sports, I was able to substitute that for taking the PE credits. So interviewing so many women for the book, I interviewed over 40 people, and a lot of them are, I have 23 portraits of women in the book who are modern day athletes in all different sports. And so many of them played at a collegiate level, whatever their sport was, and told me that they did not do any strength training in support of whatever their sport was. And there's almost no sport that couldn't benefit from having stronger athletes. So I think this is changing now. I don't think you would go to many collegiate programs today and see no strength training whatsoever, but a lot of these women are, in their 30s and didn't have that when they were in college. So I think it's something that's over the past decade really grown. But before that, it really was just sort of dependent on your coach. It wasn't something that everyone was doing.
Yeah. I mean, just like you said, maybe, a little bit longer than a decade, but it seems, women's sports have started growing and growing and growing. And obviously with Title IX and other aspects that, hey, collegiate universities are actually, I forgot what year it was. I think it was the NCAA basketball tournament, and they had like the men's weight room. Somebody posted this on Twitter. They had the men's weight room, what they were getting to work with, and then the women's weight room. And it was literally a dumbbell rack. And
it was just a rack.
Yeah. It was just like, and if you look at sports science, I mean, if you mimic sports movements and actually going like lifting barbells and doing plyometrics and X said thing, it improves your athletic performance ridiculously in high amounts rather than just, hey, here's a dumbbell, go do something like. I mean, who would do that? What's like proper trainer, strength coach would actually say, hey, yeah, here's a dumbbell rack, that's all you need. It makes zero sense.
Right. And that was I'm so glad that did get highlighted, and it's sad that it had to be highlighted on social media in order for them to do something about it. But that is how we are making progress, is by pointing out how ridiculous it is that these NCAA men's players got this beautiful weight room and the women got a single dumbbell rack that probably went up to like 25 pounds. So yes. And different sports require different things. Not everyone needs to be maxing out it. And people do different types of lifts. Some people would really benefit from like the power and speed that comes from Olympic lifting, whereas others would need something different. But so it was interesting for me in researching the book to learn about how the different athletes incorporate strength training into their routines based on what their sport of choice is. But I think absolutely, like the research shows that, everyone athletically can benefit from some kind of strength training.
Yeah, I got a lot of questions there. That's what you just said. So you started researching when you started doing the bodybuilding course, or was this before, like after high school, like when you finished sports, or when did you start doing more research into your book?
Okay, so the book, I started it in 2017.
Okay.
Is when I got the idea for the book. So I'm well past high school and college by this point.
Gotcha.
And I have been a professional writer for my entire career, a freelance writer primarily, largely focused on travel before this, but I wrote about a lot of things. I did write a lot of health as well. And so
you've always been interested in like health and fitness and that whole.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And I've learned so much. It's interesting though, because I recently found some conversations I had with a friend back in, the mid to late 2000s. And I just our ideas about strength training have changed so much since then. Like he was suggesting that I get into Olympic weightlifting. And I was like, why would I ever do that? And I was like, that's silly. And now I realize it's not silly, but definitely. I don't think that was, it just wasn't something that people were doing. And it's still something a lot of people aren't doing. Whenever I write an article about it, I have to explain what a clean and a snatch is because a lot of people don't know, and that's totally fine. But there are just so many more women out there now who are participating in powerlifting and weightlifting and strong woman competitions and all of that you wouldn't see in the mid 2000s.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you said earlier is that it was almost a narrative that if a woman goes and picks up a barbell or any type of strength, weight resistance, whatever you want to call it, that she's going to get bulky, and that's not what the male species or male whatever persona wants to see, which I 100% disagree with because I like it. So, but it's almost a cultural norm or a cultural predecessor. Is that what I'm trying to say? But again, like you said, that the Olympics. I'm a big advocate of CrossFit. I like doing that a lot, and there's women in there that. I mean, it all depends on what your definition of bulky and versus lean versus muscular. And, they're lifting, way more than I would, especially at the elite level. And I would never say that, she's bulky. No, she's not. To me, she's not. Just because she's got muscles and she's got a six-pack? No. I mean, even oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah,
no. I talk about this a lot in the book. I have an entire chapter on it, really, because the word bulky is so. It's something
misunderused almost. I mean,
yes. Well, and everyone has a definition. There's no definition of bulky, but there was a study back in. Oh, I'm going to forget now. I want to say around 2010, with celebrity photos and asking people to kind of label them. And there was a photo of Jessica Biel on the beach playing handball. She is not she's not big by any means. She's quite lean. She has a little bit of like bicep definition. She's got a little bit of ab definition, but really just on the sides. She doesn't even have like horizontal lines. And she was labeled as bulky. And women said they did not want to look like that. They did not want to look bulky. And I think to a modern eye, most people would not call Jessica Biel bulky today, but that's sort of beside the point. Like, who defines bulky and what is it? And so in researching this book, I looked into where our cultural norms come from, where our ideas of beauty come from, because we tend to think that they're kind of fixed, but they're not, especially for body type. They are a bit more They change less for facial attractiveness, for instance. We do have some hardwired ideas about what a beautiful face looks like, but bodies change drastically over time and throughout cultures. And, 10 years ago, the most common search on Google in regards to a butt was how to make yours smaller. And now it's how to make it bigger. Like, it's just been, that's just a shift that's happened in the past decade. And so our ideas about bulkiness change a lot over time. And a lot of it is about who you surround yourself with. So if you see women who are muscular, if you see women who can do pull-ups and can lift a lot of weight or whatever it is, that becomes normalized much faster than we think it does. And then your ideas expand about what women look like. So it was really interesting looking into that.
Well, do you think the entertainment industry has a lot to do with that? Obviously, like movies, TV, music, magazines, even Instagram now. Instagram influencers are saying, hey, this is what, the perfect male and or female body is supposed to look like.
Definitely. And I think, I think the entertainment industry has a little bit less to do with it today because of Instagram, because we have social media and, quote unquote, regular people can develop these followings and you can kind of find your people on social media. Whereas in the 80s and the 90s, like all we kind of had to look at in terms of this ideal body was from magazines or in movies or on TV. And so I think now we get to see kind of a wider range of different bodies, and that has opened the door for more muscularity on women, for instance, in addition to other different body types. And then I think, Hollywood has kind of followed suit, and we see more strong women on screen today. But I think it's interesting, even if you look at Wonder Woman, she's not, the actress who plays Wonder Woman is not particularly big.
She's lean.
She doesn't have a ton of muscularity, and that's no criticism of her at all, but it's just, she's probably not as muscular as, she was imagined to be by the creators.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in the comics, I don't remember seeing her being, what you would picture like a straight looking Ronnie Coleman female version, I guess. I mean, she was, muscular in the comics, but pretty lean. That's a whole different story anyway, just because the guy who created that was really infatuated with bondage and stuff. I don't know if you knew all that, but yeah, so that's neither here nor there though. So anyway, so you said you did the bodybuilding circuit for a minute, right? So did you? I did. Oh, sorry. So did you do like? Don't they have like a figure competition and then one where it's obviously you're trying to be, like I said, Ronnie Coleman version? Like I'm not familiar completely with that.
Yeah, I did a bodybuilding show. There are different categories. I competed in the bikini category, which is sort of the least amount of muscularity that you need to be successful. But in bikini, you're looking for your shoulders and hips to be approximately the same size. And then you want to come in with a smaller waist. And there's a lot of emphasis on your glutes and hamstrings. So in different categories, like figure, as you mentioned, you're looking for a V taper in the back. You want wider shoulders that come into a narrow waist. And you want a bit more definition in the upper body. So each category kind of comes with its different standards.
So were you considered by critics or friends or, I guess if you want to say haters, whatever, did they actually call you were too bulky in that?
I don't remember anyone to my face telling me that I was bulky, but I did have a family member tell me that I looked like a man. And it was really interesting because I guess I can't really say, but I think very few people would say I looked like a man because, again, I'm competing in the lowest sort of level of muscularity. I was pretty small. I was pretty lean at the time. And I just didn't really look like a man. But because like you could actually see my delts, I guess I did to him. So I did get a few comments like that, but they really didn't bother me. But I can see how they would bother some people, especially if you're getting them all the time.
Well, do you think it's? I got a couple more questions on that too. But thought, do you think that's just insecurity by that family member? It's just that, oh, she looks better than I do, in a swimsuit? Is that they just wanted to protract their hate onto you and to say something negative just to try to bring you down, that because they're already feeling down about themselves? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think in this case, it was probably just a comment that was trying to be funny. He thought he was being humorous. But it's like, what's funny about that? But I do think in some cases, I think a lot of things that are said online are from people who are very insecure. I think that is a lot of what trolling is about online. Unfortunately, I really wasn't subjected to that. And I'm grateful for that, because I did, by the time I competed in bodybuilding, that was a look that was desired by a lot of people. So,
what year was that? When did this go down?
I competed in 2017.
Okay.
Yeah. So not too long ago.
Yeah, not at all.
And, so it was just more sort of, there were more people who were familiar with it by that point.
Well, I've had a couple of friends who actually did that, and I thought they called it figure competitions, but maybe it was a swimsuit too. I don't remember. But did you do a special diet for it? Obviously, you had to get that lean.
I definitely did. That's the biggest part of it, honestly.
I'm always about that stuff. I like learning.
It changed throughout. So I had a coach, and my diet would change every week. So it's sort of hard to say what it was, but it was
recording macros. I mean, was it mainly like 60% protein, 30% carbs?
Yeah. So I started on more of a traditional bodybuilding diet like that, like a high protein, relatively high carb, low fat diet, but I didn't really see a lot of progress. So I eventually went to a low carb diet, and I ate quite a bit of fat. And I ended up on a ketogenic diet at the end. And I would be told what to eat and when, at what intervals. I think I usually ate 2 hours and 40 minutes apart.
Makes sense.
And then toward the end, and I had a certain amount of water I had to drink every day. That was really challenging at the beginning. I think I was drinking like 140 ounces of water, which was way more than I was used to. And I did start intermittent fasting too, toward the end of the training. So I would do fasted cardio in the mornings, and then I would eat, and I would train weights later in the day. And I would then often do like a yoga or Pilates or something along those lines. So a lot of times I was working out 3 times a day, which was a commitment.
Do you like intermittent fasting? I've been kind of playing with that a little bit here and there.
I do. Once I get into it, it's pretty easy for me. I always, like when I was growing up, I never ate breakfast. And so I guess I was unknowingly intermittent fasting all throughout my childhood. And so I don't mind it. I actually did an experiment when I stopped bodybuilding. I started, I had done a 10,000 meter row while I was fasting. And because it was just what my gym was doing that day.
I've done that. It's
yeah. It's just a long time to be on a rower.
My ass hurts every time. It's like, fuck.
Yeah, exactly. So I had done that. And then after I was done bodybuilding and I was eating more carbs again, and I was not intermittent fasting, that we retested it. And so I thought this will be a great opportunity to test my 2 times and see how much better I do now that I'm like eating more carbs and I'm going to fuel myself beforehand. And I actually did better fasted. I was really surprised because I went into it thinking that I was going to do better, having these carbs a certain amount of time beforehand. And I didn't. I did better fasted. And so I didn't see any performance drop with that kind of high fat, low carb diet, except for my deadlift. My like 1 rep max went down quite a bit, but my cardio, I think, got better. And I think my power or strength didn't increase, but it didn't really drop off in any of the other lifts. So that's just an interesting thing to play with. There's so many variables that you can play with your your diet and fitness and all of that.
So when you were intermediate fasting, were you take this? You said you didn't eat breakfast, so you were taking the mornings off and maybe just only eating in the evenings, or how did you do it?
When I did it, I think I started eating at 2 p.m.
Okay.
And then I would stop eating at 10 p.m.
And that worked well for you. You had the energy all throughout the day, or are you a napper? You need
I am, but you know what? I didn't really have to nap back then.
Okay.
I think because I was just eating really high quality foods and I was sleeping a lot. So I slept a lot at night. I was sleeping 9 hours.
Nice.
In order to just feel refreshed and rested. So I'm definitely a napper now, though, in my daily life. I love a good nap. I did take a nap earlier today, as a matter of fact, but I am a kind of a night owl. So that's why my 10 p.m. is sort of late for some people, but that was right after I would get home from the gym typically. Okay. So that's why I ate that late.
That makes sense. So I've heard that, when I've experienced intermediate fasting, I'm not a napper, but I've never been a napper, but I've always had energy throughout the day and I've always felt fine. But I'm also getting, like you said, at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. Like I have a hard cutoff, like I'm going to bed. Unless it's like Saturday evening. I know I don't have anything to do on Sundays, so if I go out and have a couple extra drinks of sweet tea, no big deal. But I feel like that's what always has helped me. And I don't, I've only done a couple days of intermediate fasting, but and when I do it, I wait till usually afternoon to start eating. And I've also experienced that. I don't know if you've heard of Renaissance periodization.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I followed them for a while, and that was back in 2017. And then I didn't go full strict carnivore diet, but I did it for, I was probably 80% strict, but I probably did it for 2 to 3 weeks. And it's only so much meat you can eat, and then you're just like, gosh, give me something else, man.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, that's been my experience with it. And I've had great results with it. I've not noticed. I do CrossFit competitions when I can, and I've never noticed anything as far as, and I change my programming regularly as far as my numbers going up or down, but that could just be bad strength training days. But what I'm getting at is that I work full time and go to the gym afterwards, and then I still feel pretty good all throughout the day. So,
yeah, I think it works great for a lot of people, and I think it's worth trying out for sure.
So do you CrossFit, or you said you did a 10,000 meter row? Is that kind of what your style of training is?
Yeah. So when I started strength training, it was CrossFit that I started with. Yeah. And I don't currently CrossFit because of the pandemic. It's sort of changed where I can go to the gym and all of that. But I did for a number of years.
Has that been weird out there? You're in Seattle, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Is the pandemic pretty rough time for you out there, or the whole city itself?
Yeah, well, Seattle was the first place where it hit back in spring of 2020. Right. And so that was, I think we saw it coming before most of the rest of the country. My book was actually coming out in April, and I had all of these events planned. I was going to New York. There was going to be a launch party. I was going on these radio shows and all these different things. And I remember my publicist still thought that I was going to do those things into March. And I'm like, there's no way, this is not going away. And I was right. And it did not go away. Here we still are more than a year later. But for me, I live in a small condo. So I can't really set up too much of a home gym. I'm looking at a kettlebell and a couple of dumbbells right now. And that is nice. Pretty much all I've got. So I did a lot of online classes for most of the pandemic. I have started going back into a gym now. It's a climbing gym though, but they have a weight area. So I've been slowly getting back under a barbell and just taking it really slow, because when I first went back, I got so sore trying to do something similar to what I used to do. And even though I was capable of it, sure, my body was not used to those movements or that weight. Yeah. So it's been, I don't know, it's a little bit frustrating. It's definitely humbling because I've just been kind of adding 5 pounds to the lift each time. And so I started at a pretty low level, but it's been great because my body feels good. And I'm just now getting to the point where I'm sort of at my current limit where I can't necessarily finish each set. That just happened the last time I worked out. So it's been good. I've gotten there without injury.
That's good.
But it took a while to build back up for sure.
So have you always been into climbing too, or is that just something you wanted to start?
No, I got a membership to the climbing gym last year, about a month before the pandemic started, just because I wanted to improve my grip strength and try something new. And I thought it would be a great way to do that. So I was planning to just go, 2 times a week and as a supplement to CrossFit. But then, and I bought a membership for a year during a deal. And then everything shut down. And so my membership just got put on hold, and now that's the only membership I have. And so I've been going there to lift, and I just started getting back into climbing, and luckily I had not gotten good at it yet. So I can't be, I haven't gotten worse because I was never good at climbing to begin with. So I can just start over there more easily than with CrossFit, for instance.
So do you have plans to actually, who's the guy that does all the no ropes or no safety nets stuff? Is it Han something?
Oh, Alex Honnold.
Alex Honnold, there you go. Is that what you're trying to, or is this is just something that's to kind of play around with?
Yeah, I just thought, one of my weaknesses is that upper body strength, pull-ups and that kind of thing. And I just thought climbing would be a good way to work on that in like a more fun way. And it also has a strategy element that I think is a lot of fun, because there are a lot of different ways to solve the problems, which is what they're called in bouldering. A lot of different ways that you can do each route. And it gives you an ability to bring in a mental aspect to your exercise, which I like.
And I'm sure that played a lot in writing this book and going down that whole road. Is just, for me, I think I don't want to say my biggest weakness, but the brain and just mentally doing certain workouts is just obviously mentally exhausting, and it can either break you or make you, and you just find yourself up against the wall and you got to push through. I don't know. I hope that's kind of making sense, but I respect, I guess, like when people who actually write books, is that it's something I feel like I can never sit down and get through it and finish one. And I have the utmost respect for somebody like you who can. So when did you find time, and was it mentally exhausting trying to write that book, and how long did it take and all that good stuff? Did you ever get writer's block? That's one thing I'm always interested about.
Yeah, lots of good questions there.
Sorry.
So I had 1 year to write the book. I had a book deal from Simon & Schuster, so I was on a timeline. And it really became my full-time job pretty much during that time. So I didn't have to kind of fit it into my schedule, I guess, because writing is my job. So It was what I was 100% focused on. I did try to freelance a little bit on the side, and then I ended up just kind of...
Wait, so I don't want to cut you off, but what is freelance? Yeah. Is that just writing whatever you feel like at that moment, or?
So freelance just means I don't have an employer. I'm self-employed, and I write for a variety of publications.
Okay.
So I don't get to write whatever I want, but there's kind of 2 ways it works. You can either pitch ideas. So I might have an idea for a particular publication. I will send them that idea, and then they will either assign it or ignore me or say no. And then I've been freelancing for a long time. So a lot of publications will come to me and say, hey, would you like to write a story about XYZ? And then I do so. So I had been doing that for a long time. And then I made the transition into the book world. And so I had a year to work on it. And I just, in terms of writer's block, not really. I wouldn't say I got writer's block, but there were definitely days that I didn't. I don't know. I loved this topic so much that actually it was so much fun to research. I really enjoyed it.
Sure.
I guess there were days I sat down and it's sort of like, where do I even begin? Because I had so many different chapters in the book, so many different stories. So it goes from ancient Greece and the Spartans, and some of the mythical characters of ancient Greece, to the 1800s, where we have pedestrianism, which was America's first spectator sport. And I talk about kind of the spheres of, the separate spheres for men and women that start in this era, post the Industrial Revolution. I talk about swimmers in the early 1900s and the circus stars, Muscle Beach in the 1930s, the marathon runners of the 70s, the soccer players of today, the first women in the 70s who were competing in powerlifting and bodybuilding and those kinds of sports. And so it covers just a wide array of topics. And so sometimes it was like, what do I even want to work on today? What should I research today? And the places where I would sort of get stuck were, how do I want to organize this? And what do I want to cut? Because I had way more words than I needed. I actually ended up having to cut 20,000 words from
20,000?
Yes, which was a lot.
Why did you have to cut that? Just because it was too much, or somebody wanted you to?
Yeah, my editor had a certain number of words that she wanted the book to be. And so actually, after I had a year to write it, I then had a couple of months to revise it. And that was the most intense time because I had most of the work done, but my editor had some notes for me mostly on organization. So we kind of changed the way that the book was organized during that period. And it was a lot. I was working very hard during that time and just getting everything finalized. And so that was kind of just figuring out how to put everything together. I also have bios of the 23 women who are photographed in the book and figuring out where to put those. I have quotes from each of them. And of course, they're beautiful photos and sort of like which chapter should they go in and how is this all going to come together? Those were some of the things that were challenging, but not necessarily the writing portion because that's what I excel at.
I gotcha. Well, so you interviewed all 23 of these women. They're all from different sports and different eras and all that?
Right. Well, they're all modern day athletes. Okay. So they're different ages. The youngest was 12 and the oldest was, I think 58. So they were a wide range of ages. And then I also interviewed some kind of historical figures. So one of those is Catherine Switzer. She ran the Boston Marathon in 1967 and is the first woman to do that with numbers on. And there's an iconic series of photos of one of the race organizers trying to pull her off the course. And so it was really great to have a chance to talk to her because she went on to get to really be a trailblazer in women's running, and she won the New York Marathon. She got the women's marathon added to the Olympics in 1984, and to this day she works on access for women in countries or areas where they don't have access to athletics to be able to exercise and to run. So I got to interview people like that, as well as some historians, some academics, other people who've researched different aspects of what's included in the book.
Nice. Did you watch the Olympics this year?
I watched about 12 hours a day.
So you were hardcore.
I'm a hardcore Olympics enthusiast. I have loved the Olympics ever since I can remember. In Salt Lake City in 2002, the Winter Games, I actually was a torchbearer. So I got to run with the torch, which was pretty cool because I was in high school at the time. I know. I still, because I got the the sweats or like the warm-up outfit that they wear in the Olympics when they march in. I got one of those in order to run with the torch, and I thought I was pretty cool.
I would say it's pretty badass.
Yeah, I was pretty excited.
Do you still have it?
I hope so. I hope it's at my parents' house somewhere. But I was in the local newspaper, and I was like, wow, I'm so cool.
How do you feel about, and I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate here, is that some people think that the Olympics, I don't want to say a joke, but that, it's a great opportunity for those athletes and to get that time to actually show their skills and whatever events they're doing, but they're also not getting paid and they're just kind of like, hey, we're representing our country, but we're just doing it for what? And that, I guess I'm getting this from, I think it's called The Price of Gold, and it's on HBO. It's a documentary. I think Lolo Jones is on it and Michael Phelps was in there. And they kind of talked about how, where we talk about mental health awareness, that was a big part of the Olympics, and that, just not getting paid and, actually just doing this and living on I think if you were actually on the Olympic, not the Village, but the place in Colorado, the Olympic compound.
The training center.
Yeah, there you go, training center. They were only getting like $30,000 or $36,000 a year. and that it was almost just, I guess, what are your thoughts on that, I guess, is what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. It's tough to be an athlete in most sports, honestly.
Yeah.
You know, there are some that pay extreme amounts of money, but that's the exception. And so many sports don't. And one of the things I talk about in the book is sponsorship contracts for women, particularly because they get so much less in sponsorship money than men, but they don't drive necessarily fewer sales than men. So Allyson Felix, who was just in her 5th Olympics in Tokyo and won a couple of medals to add to her collection, you know, she was a sponsored athlete with Nike. And after she got pregnant, they, you know, her contract went on a pause. Basically, she wasn't getting paid anything. And then they wanted to renegotiate and give her much less money, but they were still using her image and they were promoting her as a mother and, you know, saying Nike sponsors mothers and all of this. And a number of other track and field athletes came out in the New York Times a couple of years ago and talked about this, how they were kind of forced to get back into racing before they were ready because they wouldn't have any money otherwise. But these companies are still profiting off of their endorsement, basically, even as they're not paying them. So there's a lot of
I don't understand how that can happen.
Tied into that.
Yeah, I mean, how can you still use them and not pay for them? I mean, somebody's got to be in a breach of contract, I would think. That doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I'm sure, I mean, I'm no lawyer or anything by that means, but I don't know if you knew that. But I mean, I would assume that somebody has the right to sue somebody there, I would think.
Well, I think, you know, a lot of times these contracts are not, the athletes take what they can get because of what you're talking about. It's hard to train and to not be able to have a full-time job.
That makes sense.
And so if this is the contract they can get, they kind of sign it. And
maybe don't read the fine print saying, hey, if you do this, that we can still use your image to promote Nike and you don't get nothing. Something along those lines. That makes sense.
Yeah. And I don't know all of the details about the timing. I just know there were a number of athletes who kind of spoke out. Kara Goucher was one. She was announcing this year on the Olympics for the distance running, and Alicia Montano and Allyson Felix. And they all kind of talked about how they didn't really have these fair contracts. And Allyson ended up going to Athleta, and Simone Biles signed with them as well. So I think there are companies now, and Nike did change its contract for athletes moving forward, which is great. And I think more companies are following suit. But yeah, I think it is really difficult to be an athlete in a lot of these sports that don't have that year-round attention that that you would get in the NBA or the WNBA or the NFL or whatever. So yeah, I imagine like being an archer is difficult because you're not getting paid.
Yeah, I don't even think, how many people watch archery there? I mean,
I watched it all this year.
Well, you did, but I mean, I could say like I was just watch the main stuff, and even if it's that, it was probably predominantly just basketball. And
see, that's the 3-on-3 was fun this year, but why watch basketball in the Olympics when you can watch it all the other times?
And that's a great point. And I think it was just because that's the only one that actually followed the most athletes and knew anything about.
Yeah, you knew who they were.
Yeah, and I think that's the only reason why. And when I say I watched it, I may have watched the gold medal game and maybe one before that. It's not like I was watching it 12 hours a day, but I think that was the only reason. Like, there was a few gymnastics people that I know, but I don't follow hardcore, so yeah.
Yeah.
That's just my perspective.
I like learning about new sports in the Olympics, or not new sports, but like sports that I don't know that much about. And there are definitely some that are more and less entertaining. Yeah. But I just watched the Paralympics, which just concluded. And there are a couple of sports in the Paralympics that aren't in the Olympics that were really interesting to watch, just because I've never seen them before and I don't even know how they work. So it was fun to watch.
Well, I think skateboarding was in there this year too. And I think Tony Hawk had a lot to do with that. And I'm a fan of him, and I don't skateboard at all, but I didn't even watch any of it. But I thought it was kind of cool that it was being part of that.
Yeah, it was fun. I don't know. They had two different events, and the first one was sort of I don't know. It wasn't as fun when they were just throwing like a single trick, but when they did the full, they had like a minute or something to go around the skate park and do as many things as possible. That was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah. Well, it does seem that women's volleyball gets a lot more attention compared to men's volleyball, and I can kind of understand why TV is doing it that way, but also not. They shouldn't be almost just using like, I guess, I don't know how to say this, but I guess they're promoting women's bodies in order to get more ratings, just because women's volleyball. I think there was a shorts kind of like, hey, they got fined for their shorts being too long or too short. I might be butchering this.
That was actually beach handball.
Oh, okay.
And that's not a sport in the Olympics, but a lot of people made a lot of it's okay because it happened right before the Olympics, and a lot of people made comparisons to beach volleyball because there is
maybe that's what I'm getting confused on.
A uniform thing, but they are now allowed to they can wear shorts or bikinis. They sort of have a choice. It was so hot in Tokyo this year that, of course, most of the teams went for as little as possible because it was so hot.
But I mean, is that just? I always thought that was just one of the rules that, hey, we want women to wear the shortest shorts that they can, just because for
ratings.
Yeah, exactly. Ratings and views.
Yeah, it has been. I think they're finally rectifying that. I know in 2012, when boxing was introduced to the Olympics, initially the women were going to be required to wear skirts while they boxed. And there was a huge outcry over that. Like, women were like, what if we want to wear shorts? And they finally relented and allowed women to wear either shorts or a skirt. But there has been a rule in the past for volleyball players. There's been one for figure skaters that they can't, they had to wear certain cut of, I don't know, is it a leotard in? I feel like it's something else in figure skating. I can't remember what their costumes are called. And then women's clothing or uniforms for sports have been regulated from the start. I do talk about that in the book as well. And when sports were first kind of accepted for women in the late 1800s, it was only ones that they could look ladylike while doing. So we're talking croquet or tennis or anything where they could wear a long skirt. And
like they weren't allowed to wear pants.
No. And in the first Olympics that women participated in, they all wore long skirts, which makes it hard to play a lot of different sports because skirts are very constricting. And in some sports, it makes sense to wear a skirt, but very few does it make sense to wear an ankle-length skirt, which is what they were wearing. So it's really interesting because when bicycling became a big craze in the 1890s, that is what kind of led to clothing reform for women, because they were getting into cycling and they realized they couldn't cycle very well with these long skirts and with these corsets. And so they started to bring the hemline up a little bit. They started to loosen the waist and all of that. And it eventually led to women ditching so much of that restrictive clothing.
Is that what started getting more ratings and views back then? Is that also?
Well, there wasn't anything
I know,
back then.
Exactly, but we're like I guess they started noticing more attention from the opposite sex, or just let's keep it going.
There were all of these magazine articles telling women, not to show their ankles because that was an invitation for men to lust after them, basically. So the onus was put on the women not to show too much skin because the men couldn't take it. And I think that we still see that today, unfortunately, where women are responsible for men's reactions to them.
Well, that's usually the narrative, but it's not always the case, I guess. Hopefully I said that correctly, but But showing us some ankle, huh?
Ankle was bad. There was this article that showed all of these different ankles in different cities. So like what the cyclists in Boston were wearing versus New York versus Louisville, and like what the styles were for showing ankle in those places.
Well, I would say, in Boston and stuff in the colder months, I wouldn't be showing a whole lot of anything, but it's just me, I guess.
Well, this is when bloomers come into vogue and other things, other garments where you can move a little bit more and and put socks on, but where you don't have to have a skirt because just think of the wind resistance with all of those layers that they had on. It just made it really hard to pedal. And they were like, forget this. And the bike was super exciting for them because for the first time, women could go somewhere without a chaperone. They could get exercise.
Yeah.
They could, meet friends, and it really.
Yeah, they didn't have to live their typical, when I say they, the typical, I don't want to use the word narrative again, but no, it's usually like, hey, you just stay home and hang out and let everyone else go do it. But yeah, I agree 100%. Like, get out there and do your thing and, and like live your life and like, yeah, meet other people and show what you got. If you got something to show in sports, do it. So yeah, be a badass. Yeah, I can resonate with that 100%. I mean, I couldn't, like the one thing this pandemic is, I've learned from it is that, sitting inside sucks.
Right.
Yeah. And like, and I may have said this before, talked about this before on here, but I mean, just my mindset and the way I am, I know that I always feel better when I'm out moving around, picking up something heavy. And it doesn't have to, everyone's got their thing. And that's just CrossFit's my thing. But you just feel better. I mean, I feel like our bodies are just made to move, we're not made to sit around and stare at our phones all day and Netflix, which I do that too. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that, but
right.
But yeah, I couldn't imagine I just couldn't know how my mind completely like get stress free and like that's my happy place, and I couldn't imagine just somebody never getting to do that, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're out there in the world just like you said, cycling and showing off what you got. It's almost like a cow seeing the grass for the first time in its life, or a dog, I guess. Maybe a cow is a bad example, but I don't know.
Right. Yeah, it was interesting because it was one of the catalysts for women's suffrage. Once they got that little taste of independence of riding a bicycle, they were like, we need some more rights around here. So it went beyond just being able to move their bodies, which of course is very important. But that's one of the things that Strong Like Her makes connections between is physical strength and all kinds of other strengths like mental and emotional and all of that.
Well, it's 2021. So where do you see the future for, like we just said, women's sports and physical, emotional, and mental health going with women's sports? And men, if you want to talk about that too.
Yeah, good question. So I mentioned earlier that I interviewed Catherine Switzer for the book, who was an early marathoner. And she brought up a point that I'd never really thought about before that I thought was really interesting. And that is that the way that we look at athletic accomplishment right now is within a paradigm of which sports are popular. So sports like football are popular, which require power and strength and speed. But what if there are sports in the future that value endurance and balance and strategy? Those are things that women can excel at. So as new sports are developed, we may have completely different ideas about who we consider to be the best athletes. So I don't know what's going to happen. I think in the near term that we are seeing more respect for women's sports. We're seeing people getting stronger across the board, but I think we're seeing women really getting a lot more interested in strength sports. They've exploded over the past 10 years in terms of how many women are powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting and doing CrossFit and all of that. And I think, we've talked about the sponsorships. I think we're seeing more movement on that side of things. And one area I think we still have room to improve in is actually who commentates on sports. In the Olympics this year, the majority of the commentators were still men. There were a lot of women, but they were typically in sideline reporting roles, and they weren't doing the play-by-play analysis. So that's one area I'm interested in looking at moving forward is who gets to talk about sports and why.
I didn't even ever make that regulation or whatever, that idea that only is predominantly male commentators. Like I can only think of a handful of I can't even think. Cheryl Miller was one for the NBA. They got another one. I can't remember her name at all. But yeah, I mean, like I only probably named 2 or 3. And there was one famous college football player, or not football female commentator. blonde. Erin Andrews, that's her name. Yeah, that's the only probably.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably the only ones I could actually name that in major sports that actually commentated as far as
But
females.
isn't Erin Andrews a sideline reporter?
True. You're right.
That's the thing. So sideline reporting is a job that a fair amount of women are in, but they're not very often in the booth calling
I'm with
the
you
actual game. And I'm reading a book right now called Sidelined about women, women in sports journalism, basically. And it's really interesting how it's been a very short amount of time that women have been allowed to commentate at all, and there's still a huge imbalance. And so many of the arguments that people use, like, oh, well, she never played this sport. There are many, many male commentators who never played whatever sport it is on a high level. And we're not like, oh, you weren't in the MLB, so you can't talk about baseball. We accept what they say about baseball. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with that statement, just because, like, I have friends, and even my brother, that has never played at that level by any means, but talking to him, he can list off statistics without even having notes in front of him, looking up on Google or whatever, and it's just like, I don't even understand how you remember it. So, yeah, it can be done if you have the willingness just to sit around and do the research, and if you enjoy it, that's great. Like, like I said, for example, my brother, but yeah, it can be done. That's my point.
No, it's definitely not a requirement. And same with coaching. You don't have to have been a high level player necessarily to be a great coach. There are a lot of great coaches who didn't play at the highest level. Mm-hmm. And that's another area, coaching and sort of who's in the management office of these different teams, that we still see a lot of imbalance.
I once heard a quote that it was basically said that the better player or athlete you were at your individual sport, the worst coach you would ever be.
I think that's kind of true. I mean, I remember once I went surfing in Costa Rica. Mm-hmm. I'd never been surfing before, and this was a mistake, but I just went out with this guy who was recommended by someone at my hostel, and he was a great surfer. And when I asked him, I'm out there, I'm getting like beaten by the waves. And I was like, can you give me some tips? And he was like, just stand up. And I'm like, oh, how do I stand up on this board? Like, I've never been surfing before. Like, give me something to work with, dude. And he's like, I don't know. I just stand up. And it's like, he's a great surfer. So he doesn't know how to explain to somebody else how to surf because he's never had to break it down. It's always come naturally to him. Mm-hmm. He's always been good at it. Yeah. And of course, there are some people who do sports who learn to be great coaches. But I think there is something about sometimes when you're really good at something, it doesn't mean that you can teach other people how to do it.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% because, I coach a couple of classes of CrossFit a week or two, and that I think coaches need coaches, and that I always learn from other coaches. And if you sit around and do the work and not everybody learns the way you think that they learn, as far as it be verbal, you're showing a demonstration or you're kind of doing both at the same time. But say if I'm teaching you like clean and jerk, for example, you're not going to get it just from me like, hey, just do this. People need more. Right. Yeah. And that's one thing I've learned as far as my little coaching career I have, if you want to call it that. So, but yeah.
Definitely. And we're getting off topic now, but
that's okay.
When have you heard a cue from a coach that suddenly like clicks in your head and you're like, oh, that makes sense. Whereas your other coach has been trying to tell you the same thing in different words for a while, but someone else just says it and like makes a different, metaphor or whatever it is. And you're suddenly like, oh yes, I get it now. So everyone benefits from different approaches, and good coaches know how to, use different approaches for different athletes. And that's not necessarily correlated with having been one of the best yourself.
Have you ever seen the movie Forgetting Sarah Marshall?
Yes.
With Paul Rudd. He's trying to teach, I forgot the other guy's name, but he's trying to teach him how to surf. And he's like, hey, just do more. No, do less. No, you got to do something. That kind of reminded me of the story you just told me. So, and he's trying to teach him.
It was terrible. I came back with they were also supposed to bring a rash guard for me and they didn't. Oh. So I just came back. My entire stomach was just like cut up from the board. And I remember it was Christmas time when I came back, and it hurt to have a shirt on because I was all torn up on my abdomen. So anyway, good times. But I did. Okay, I'm not going to say this is why, but I later tried surfing again in Tofino, where there is a surf school run by women, and I got it. I stood up multiple times on the board and rode some. I'm not going to say it was because women were teaching me, but it might have been because women were teaching me.
I like that. Well, you did it though. So has that been the only 2 times you've surfed?
Yes, I've only done it twice.
Oh, you didn't keep the party going after you learned to
stand up?
Is it fun? I've never done it.
It was fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of scary. Like I have a healthy respect for the ocean, which I think everyone should, because the ocean can do whatever it wants. I
agree.
I think one of the chapters in my book actually talks about the early long distance swimmers who were out in the ocean, who were, of course, supposed to swim in skirts at the time. You were supposed to swim in wool skirts and
wool skirts.
Yeah, wool or flannel was what swimwear was made of back then because it insulated from the cold, but it's not super buoyant. So it was very hard for women wearing long skirts. Plus, they had booties on. They had blouses that had like big puffy sleeves. They wore like a cap, like a hat kind of thing. And so a lot of women didn't want to learn how to swim because it was dangerous just to get in the water with all this stuff on. And so I talk about this in the book because it led to a tragedy. Women didn't know how to swim. And so those early swimmers who were kind of bucking the norms and wearing male swimsuits, they were really daredevils. Like they were really out there doing something very different because swimming in the ocean is serious, and going against what those cultural norms were was serious too. So they were pretty badass.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, so swimming in open water and compared to a swimming pool is a completely different ballgame.
So different. I mentioned I swam in high school, and that was, one of my main sports. And I did a triathlon a while ago that was in open water. And I really didn't practice in open water beforehand because I was a pretty strong swimmer in a pool. And I was like, I got this. And then I got into the open water and I was like, no, get me out of here. This is horrible. Like people are kicking me in the face. And it's totally different swimming in those waves than when you're in a pool.
Yeah, so you got pretty humbled there. I've had my...
I did get humbled. I totally got humbled. And one of the women in my book is a long distance swimmer. She has swum... She's in the Guinness Book of World Records for swimming
no big deal.
On 6 continents in 16 days.
Oh.
A marathon on each continent, I should say.
Okay.
And she's done the 7 ice miles challenge, which is when you swim on an ice mile on all 7 continents. And an ice mile is like freezing water. And anyway, she's incredible. And she's really inspired me to think about trying some kind of open water challenge because I just think it would be mentally difficult, and I'm attracted to that, but it's hard to coordinate. You need to have people out there with you. You can't just jump into the ocean and see what happens.
So you're attracted to doing things that are tough for you? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah. It's fun.
Yeah, because, you don't want to take always the easy road, that if you take the harder road, you kind of find out, we talked about this maybe a little bit earlier, but you find out what you're made of. And that's one argument that when people who do CrossFit is that, say we got 50 box jumps to do or whatever, X that thing, I'm talking about 10,000 meter road like we talked about earlier. So after you do something like that, regular life almost just comes to be easier. Somebody flicks you off going down the road because you may or may not have cut them off or whatever, and you're kind of all right, whatever, fuck it, no big deal. So yeah, I mean, I agree, because that's one thing that also this little fitness and journey, if that's what you want to call it, that I'm on, has taught me is that, don't always have to take the easy road. Take a harder road and find out what you're made of, and you actually learn a lot about yourself, or I have anyway, and that's been my experience. And that might be generalizing, but
no, absolutely. I think that goes back to what we're talking about with the connection between physical strength and other types of strength. Like you do build up that mental strength by learning that you can take on these challenges. And I think there's a saying in CrossFit, like, I'm trying to think of it. It's something like, I hate you, I hate this, I'll see you tomorrow kind of thing, where you're just like, this was horrible. There was nothing about it that I enjoyed. And yet I will be back tomorrow to do it again, because there is something about being able to do those terrible workouts and get through them, especially together, and then, try it again.
Yeah. I mean, that's like when you said together, I mean, I've met some of my best friends just through this whole CrossFit thing. And I mean, it doesn't have to be CrossFit. It can be what anybody's doing. But, when you're, taking grenades there in a trench, working out with other people around you, and they're all, hey, it sucks. It sucks for them too, but it creates a new bond. I mean, yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I think that's a lot of why CrossFit has been so popular is because it does create that community, and people are looking for that kind of community.
Yeah. This kind of just hit I don't know why my brain just thought of this, but do you know who Wim Hof is?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So like his breathing techniques, and I guess I was going to mention this earlier, why it just hit me now. But him putting himself through these, I think he swam underwater for X amount of distance, and I think he's got a world record for that. But just putting himself through stuff like that is just, something I would like to build up to maybe one day. But yeah, and just the way his breathing techniques that he teaches, if that's a real thing, and how he releases something in his breath. I think it was DMT, but I could be wrong on that. But releases something in his brain, that way he can keep going. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty badass.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not there yet, but
I agree 100%. Me neither.
maybe one day.
Yeah, maybe one day in the next 20 years if we're still here, and maybe with CRISPR technology, maybe change a few genes or something, but who knows.
Right.
Haley, we did over an hour.
Here we are. I still have things to say.
Oh yeah, you want to keep going?
Well, no, no, I'm good. I'm just saying. I didn't know if I would be able to talk this long, but I did.
Yeah, you did. And I just literally just got home from the gym, and I am starving right now. So that's kind of where my mind's going. But before we get off here, your book, Strong Like Her, tell everybody how to find you on the socials and the Instaface and all that good stuff. And if you want to or don't, it's your choice. So yeah, it's your moment now.
Yeah, the book is available wherever books are sold. You can get it from a local bookseller or your favorite online retailer. And you can find me at HaleyShapley.com or on social media at Haley Shapley.
Nice. Well, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. This was awesome. I enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. All right. Go read, people, and stay classy and all that good stuff.